So my name's Matt. I work at SoftChoice. If anybody isn't familiar with SoftChoice, we are located in Toronto, Canadian company, and have an office right here in Vancouver, which I'm based here. So if anybody ever after the event or anything I raise here doesn't make sense, got questions that you want to deep dive in with me, company I work for is great because I get to talk to people without billing you for it, and just get to talk about what I love, which is the cloud, technology, all that sort of stuff. But I'm not a salesperson, so I won't linger on that. So just to give you guys an idea of what I'll be covering in the next few minutes, give you a little intro about where I'm from and what we're going to be covering, and then just tap on the choices around the cloud and PHP and what we can do there. Then explore a bit of the architecture, so the choices stemming onto that, the architecture, what you may be looking at when you do deploy to the cloud. Then we'll have a look at the development aspect on AWS and Azure. Just on that point, who here is using the public cloud for their web development at the moment? So we got, eventually everybody will raise their arms, or is that about a little bit over half, I think? Who's using private cloud? Who even knows what private cloud means? I don't know. I always find there's a bit of debate around public cloud and private cloud all the time. Basically, my thinking is private cloud is you own the hardware or you know where the data center is. Public cloud is you're not. But at the end of the day, it's all just a DC that's not actually sitting in your office. And then we'll just conclude things and give a wrap up. By the way, if anybody has any questions during any of this, feel free to just interrupt me. I'd rather that than you have the best question ever and then by the end you've forgotten what it was. So feel free just to yell out and let me know. I can't promise, if you put me on the spot about development things, that I can really deep dive into it, but I am in contact with the people that maybe will be able to answer those things for you anyway. So, oh man, I didn't realize they put a photo of me up there. So just stemming on a little bit about myself here, that the area that I work in is just architecture and consulting around the cloud. So obviously Amazon, a lot of you would know, very focused on the development space. Everybody else that's jumping into the public cloud now, like the IBMs and the Microsofts and those guys, have all recognized that that's where we should start, and that's where the biggest focus is around public cloud. And it makes the most sense. I mean, unless you have some sort of sovereignty issues or IP or latency issues, the cost alone is a real drawing factor. So I've been in the industry, the IT industry in general, back when I actually had to update firmware updates and all that sort of pain, over 15 years. But I've been in the cloud space for about 5 years, and the accent is not New Zealand, it's Australian. So just want to clarify that. Sorry if there's any New Zealanders here, but... and yeah, I spent a bit of time in the Middle East working with the uniqueness over there. But these days I live permanently here in Canada, so not going anywhere. The company I work for is SoftChoice. It's a Canadian company. We look after all of North America. We're a Microsoft partner, Amazon partner, VMware with vCloud Air, do a lot of IBM work, Cisco, Microsoft licensing, all that spectrum. Dell, and I just grabbed a heap of logos and just threw them up there. I got to a point where I said, okay, I got to stop throwing these logos up here. But yeah, it's a great place to work, just like Hootsuite, with the whole interesting and creative, and allowed to bring my dog to work, so I love that. And just for a bit of credibility, just blotted up there the fact that on MSP Mentor, I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with their site. MSP is around managed services and helping people with their IT. We were ranked this year as number 7 out of, I think, they only list about 501 in the world, and that's worldwide as well. So we're ranked number 7, and then Talking Cloud in the top 100 we were 38. So that's up against the Googles and the Microsofts, and all those guys are in there as well. So we're number 38, which I think is awesome. I love the fact that I'm working for a company that's that dedicated to the cloud, a company that's been around for so long. It's not a quick startup that came around yesterday, yet we're innovative and thoughtful enough to see where things are going. So let's get on with talking about PHP and the cloud. So a lot of the choices that you've got out there around the public cloud, just to raise a hands on this, Amazon AWS, who's using Amazon? Okay, that's probably everybody that put up their hand for public cloud before, I would say. Anybody using a mix, more than one? Okay, a few honest people. I mean, I like to use at least a handful of different clouds just to be aware of what's going on. Microsoft Azure. Oh, you don't want to be up the front admitting that. Everybody's just looking at you right now, just going, oh, "Really?" No. I must say, Amazon and Microsoft are definitely leading the way in this public cloud space. VMware, vCloud Air and Software, and OpenStack, and other technologies like that, I think are really good. Not only just to keep these big guys honest, but just in Canada here, where we have a lot of sovereignty latency issues, Amazon and Microsoft don't have a Canadian presence. So these other players, I think, are really important. If you're using Amazon today, it's good to respect the fact that these guys are doing Canadian presence. I think Software's got Toronto, Montreal, and Edmonton very soon. They're going to put the pressure on people like Amazon and Microsoft Azure to put data centers here in Canada, if we're jumping onto that bandwagon enough. So, okay, architecture around development. So there's a lot of things to consider here. I know PHP group here, and it's all about the coding and putting that web bit out there, but there's a lot of pieces that tie to it. And there's a lot of things that you probably already offload if you were doing private. If you're doing public, then you're probably already aware of these pieces that you can tap into. We've got the network layer, so whether you're tying that in, doing a hybrid between the cloud and on-premise, we've got that advantage there. Dedicated hardware as well. That's one misconception that a lot of people have about the public cloud. People think public means that, hey, I've got to share my hardware with everybody else. Not true. I think on Amazon, I think I worked it out one day, it's only like 20% extra in cost. So you're not looking at some sort of 500% markup or something to have your own dedicated hardware. Granted, a lot of the clients I work with, it's more around latency and getting a guaranteed throughput rather than any sort of security concerns or anything like that. But I do deal with a lot of clients around compliance, and it does let them breathe easier at night. PCI compliance and that actually doesn't, most of the time, those sort of compliances don't actually dictate that you need to have dedicated hardware, so there's another fallacy out there. Your edge cache. So if you're using someone else out there, you might be using something like a third-party service like Solarflares. You can actually tie that into Amazon or Azure and take advantage of theirs, which means also there's less of a jump between networks. Obviously, it's all within their network, so you can actually keep it all within the same house, which means better for your performance. Load balancing. So this is something I must say I was at a Drupal user group a couple of months ago, and this was one of the pain points that I actually found was around load balancing and auto scaling that traditional solutions didn't have an answer for out there. Everything was in the traditional data center. Was one of the things that everybody just put up with, I felt. Like it was like this elephant in the room that everybody had heard everything else going on in the public cloud, but didn't want to jump onto it. They wanted to keep their own hardware, actually touch it. I've heard people say, if you can't touch it, you don't own it. Personally, I think that goes out the window when you're actually trying to get ahead of everybody and keep competitive and stay on that price point as well. And also have that high availability that a lot of us have, well, years ago we didn't even think of because we could only afford that one server to keep running. So load balancing and auto scaling, I think, is a brilliant thing about public cloud. The fact that, say you've got a gambling site, say it's horse races, for instance, you can have your website automatically scale up for that one event per year. In Australia, it would be the Melbourne Cup. I'm not sure what the equivalent is in Canada because nobody seems to talk about horse racing here. But I had a client back in Australia who the one thing that sold them on moving to the public cloud for their PHP website for gambling was that we had this one event per year, the Melbourne Cup, and that was, they had servers sitting in a data center that did nothing all year. About 90% of their servers just sat there, nothing, and big investment. They were spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on these servers, set them up, and sit there to do nothing until this one day of the year where they just, and every year they hit maximum capacity because they were growing so well, their marketing department was doing such a great job that they found that they would hit capacity every year and they'd have unhappy customers. So that's another great thing about the public cloud is the fact that in theory, it's going to scale unlimited to what you're meeting. So if you're got the right pricing model set up, your customers that you're working on the websites for, if they've got the right pricing model set up, then and they're getting a cut, then it should reflect the cost of that scaling for those servers that are getting spun up. It means more customers, nobody's getting any latency or delays there, so it means people will come back as well. So retail is a good one as well. Black Friday sales and things like that. They're going to get a big hit, and these sort of technologies, the fact that you're not going to hit a brick wall where there's, and also the other thing about traditional data centers, I do a lot of work with private data centers, so I don't want to really talk too bad about them. But a lot of the time, you have to actually say, right, this is the maximum that we predict that we'll see. Can you provision for us some compute, some storage and everything ready for when we might hit that? So that's another problem I see is that you're paying for things that are just sitting there idle, a lot of waste. And also it's a lot of waste for those private data centers that have got that equipment sitting there doing nothing a lot of the time. Databases, a lot of choice there. I've got a lot of choice to tap into there. Compliance, I think I tapped on that earlier around, and if anybody, I won't deep dive into it now, but I've got a lot of experience around compliance and HIPAA and PCI and what is it? Something over like 30 different or 50 different compliances that Amazon does alone. So I can talk at length on that. And security, another big topic. Security, antivirus, those sort of areas I actually find a lot of people actually forget about on the public cloud. When you're building your own infrastructure, I think maybe it's because it takes us a month to get that HP or Dell hardware in and firmware it and install the operating system and all that. That by that stage we've gone, oh yeah, I've got to do antivirus. Oh, I've got to do the firewall correctly. I've got to set up the network and all that. On the cloud, I think a lot of people shortcut things because you can set up a network within 15 minutes, just a couple of mouse clicks, and you've got a script that automatically does all these things. And I know in the developer space, we probably get a lot of flack for shortcutting things. And I know the operations team used to always make fun of me wanting to bypass, and we'd always come back with, oh, it must be the antivirus, must be the firewall, must be, just turn it all off and it'll work. And that's because we're in the development space. But the great thing I like is about the cloud is we can work in those environments that are just like the production environment. So all you're doing is just changing the internet, the DNS entry or something like that to come through to the live account. It's not like we're forklifting something over to a totally different environment, to Cisco and expensive equipment that we couldn't afford for our test environment. 9 times out of 10, everything is almost identical. So we can do a proper test, and we're not upsetting the ops team as much as we did in the past. So I think that's an important thing to consider and understand, especially since I think the days of everybody concentrating on patches for operating systems is starting to disappear. Everything's becoming application-based with Docker and things like that. We're not worried about that. I think there's going to be a shift more, well, it's already happening, towards security for the applications instead of blaming the operating system and the network and the environment that it's sitting on. So I think that's an important thing to get around. So I've stolen this from Amazon's website, but it gives a good idea. I think this is a really good example for any web development. All the options out there that we've got, very generic here, talking about we're looking after the DNS and the routing of the traffic here, coming through to a load balancer here, which is going to distribute the traffic evenly between our web servers. Then we're going to go onto a load balancer for our application servers, and then finally hit our databases at the back. The A and B here is interesting because that's splitting the workloads between different data centers or regions. So you could have East Coast, West Coast, high availability. So when we finally get our earthquake that's overdue here, we'll be fine and we'll be laughing because our website's all still running. And we've got lots of options there to tap into. And then just over here, the cloud front for Amazon, which is doing your caching globally, so that when somebody hits something generic, such as what we've got stored in the S3 storage, they hit that fast. So, and if anybody isn't aware already, so Amazon's got their S3 storage, which is their bucket file data storage, raw data. It is static, but if you've got anything static on your website, such as images or things like that, you can actually tap into that and use it for your websites. So not only are you saving in costs there, and the high availability that comes with the 11 nines of durability and all those sort of technical bits, but you're also, I find the traffic going into the S3 is pretty phenomenal. Compared to web servers where you've got they're virtual machines, you've got to make sure that you've got the right CPU there, you've got to make sure that you set up your auto scaling. If you've got raw files there that you're tapping into, you can just throw them in the S3, do a pointer to them, and not worry about the rest. So, in essence, although it looks like a lot's going on there, once you've got the architecture set up right, there's really a lot of it's automated. It's looking after itself. So I think a lot of the time now, I spend a lot of time planning this out for clients instead of us tacking things on later. Sometimes, especially with the networking layer, it's harder to shift the ship later on. But if you're architecting it right from day one, with the idea that, hey, this could grow big, then you're right. But you're still not spending that money that you would normally be expected to spend if you walked into a traditional private cloud data center and said, right, I'm expecting 1 million hits a day, they're going to say, well, we've got to provision this up right now. But with the public cloud, all you have to do is just make sure the design is right, and it'll look after the rest itself automatically if we've got that auto scaling and the load balancing set up correctly. Does anybody have any questions about this? I've explained it perfectly, or so just a few references here around. So I'm going to concentrate on this slide with AWS. As you can probably tell, it's probably my strength is the AWS area. It's what I've been doing for 5 years, day in, day out, doing a lot of presentations about it as well. There is on GitHub, if you can see that address there, there is a download there for the SDK for Amazon's PHP tie-in. And there's also a lot of guides out there and documentation. So I just listed off here a few of the advantages I see with the SDK for PHP. So if you're using DynamoDB, there's a lot of tie-ins there that you can do with session handlers. So it's not just about the PHP bit, but how it's interfacing in with the database in the back end. If you've got large uploads that people are doing, we can use the SDK to do them as multi-part uploads, so that if the upload drops off halfway through, you're not going to lose the whole thing. So, and that ties in with their S3 and their Glacier. Glacier is their long-term archiving storage, 1 cent a gig. And then also the resource helpers. So all about managing your requests and your transactions and resources that you've got happening in the back end. If you're using the SDK, Amazon's SDK is going to manage all that for you automatically. So you don't have to worry about working out round robins or timing or things like that. It's just going to manage that automatically for you in the back end. And then just some things I called out here is around OpsWorks and Elastic Beanstalk. Some things there that you can actually take advantage of to automate a lot of your deployments or management or ongoing escalation and auto-scaling around those things. Anybody have? Oh, yep.
Can you spin up instances with the PHP SDK?
So, yes and no. I guess Amazon. Oh, sorry. Rob was asking whether you could use the SDK to automatically spin up other VMs, other instances within Amazon. So, yes, you can, is the basic answer, but it's not dependent totally on the SDK. Obviously, there's a lot there with JSON scripting that you can do around Amazon, and that's why it makes it hard to clearly answer the question, but it's also the reason why I like Amazon is because they've got so many different services there that you're not having to tap into something else third party. It's all, it all can be done. You just might have to step outside of the SDK to pull in something else to trigger something automatically. So, does anybody else have any questions? Okay, so I'll jump onto the enemy now, Azure. So I think it's good. I think it's good that everybody earlier said that, well, there was one hand up the front here around Azure. But I think it's good that I could talk about Amazon all day, which majority of people here are familiar with. But I think we're here to learn about, or I am anyway, to learn about things that I'm not already familiar with. What else is out there? Azure is a big player out there, Microsoft Azure. They're, I think on the Gartner table now, they're coming up close behind, well, not close, but out of anybody who's going to be close, they're the closest coming up behind Amazon. And And they are, I am finding it harder and harder to distinguish for clients when they say to me, which one should I pick out of these two big juggernauts? Should I pick Amazon or should I pick Azure? The battle is getting closer and closer. And Azure, they have the same, lot of things comparable, just they go in a slightly different direction on some things. So they've got up on GitHub as well their PHP SDK tie-in. They also, Microsoft do a very good job of documentations and guides. And then also, the two areas I find that they do a really good job of is the MySQL, and the MongoDB. I don't know whether that's just because people who are Microsoft orientated seem to go in that direction for their back-end databases. But that is the feeling that I get. It could also be because they're the target areas that Azure is looking at instead of following too closely behind the other players. And then we were talking earlier about S3 storage on Amazon, which is the file data, raw data storage. So Microsoft have got what they call blob storage. This came about when, I think it was about SharePoint 2007. They started using blob storage to get the storage outside of the SQL database. So it's basically raw data. Back in those days, it was just raw data sitting there outside of the database, and the database would have a call to that raw data instead of it being embedded inside the SQL database, which, as you know, if you've dealt with Microsoft SQL, it does slow down things and becomes quite a pain as soon as it starts getting quite big. So Microsoft actually have a lot of different options around their blob storage now. They've got the S3 equivalent, which is their raw data storage, but they've also got table services. I think there's about, from memory, I think there's about 4 or 5 different types of blob storages that are specific around what workloads you actually want to do in there. So I find that this is a good way of like seeing the differences between the two. Amazon are just doing simple S3 storage. They have their R-based storage. I think it's R2, because it's only in 2 data centers, and then they got their Glacier. But it's not around the workloads that you're doing. It's around the cost and how much redundancy there is there.
I was wondering, have you actually tried setting up your full environment using any of these SDKs PHP SDKs by Amazon or Azure? Like, so right from scratch, there's nothing there, and then you build everything out?
I particularly haven't. Yeah. I guess my knowledge is not, I mean, I come from a development background, university and all that. Kind of shifted into the architecture area in the last 5 years. But yeah, it's a good question. If people didn't hear, it's just about, he's just asking about whether I've personally set up from scratch with the SDK. Most clients that come to me have already something happening, and they're wanting to take advantage or move things over to Amazon. So we're looking at the architecture, but then on top of that, we're saying, hey, you know that there's these other things that you can take advantage of that are not going to change overnight either. They're set in their ways, just like an API that people are doing these days. So you know that the rug's not going to be pulled under from you tomorrow when they shift everything again. So in that regards, like any API, you take advantage of something that gets reused and fine-tuned by many people, not just in your own little world there and having to rewrite things from scratch. But yeah, no, I haven't done anything from scratch myself. Yes?
Do you have any experience working with Google Cloud Services or their API? And how does that differentiate from what you're showing us here?
Yeah, so the question was, my experience around Google's cloud. Um, so I could probably talk around VMware and OpenStack and Google on a very general basis. Azure and AWS, probably my key knowledge basis. I know that their app services are very good. Just throw your code in and pops out a great application sort of thing. I am getting a little bit more involved with it now that VMware's vCloud Air is tying in with Google. I think what they're now doing is that tie-in's perfect because it was everything that VMware was missing before that goes beyond. But no, I can't talk at too much depth. If you want to we can take offline and have a chat about what you're doing around Google, because I'd love to learn, if you're into the Google space, love to learn what's... It is very similar. The thing that frustrates me about Google a little bit is I've tried to find user groups out there. They don't seem to exist. I guess everybody's on Hangouts. Yeah, there's no real people using Google. It's all online. But yeah, they are. I haven't actually personally put anything up on the Google Cloud. Done a lot of reading about it, so I couldn't give you any real world scenarios or examples of what I've done. But from what I read, it sounds like they're following very closely with the basics. Their tie-in with VMware's vCloud Air gave them that VM, like the VM stuff that they were missing. Also gave VMware the storage as a service and all those great things. So that's one thing that Google's doing well is the S3, the blob storage, that sort of stuff very well. They've also, like I said before, they've got their app service where you can just throw your application code in and they'll look after the whole back end, the VMs and everything. You don't even have to worry about it. So that's something that's really good there. Yeah. Yeah, sure. No, that's a good question. Question's just around, I guess, monitoring and analytics around what's going on in your cloud. And it's normally, when I'm talking to clients, they're getting a hard time just understanding how it's going to work in the first place. It's not until afterwards that they really understand that they need that insight into how it's operating. Otherwise, how do you know that you're saving money in the public cloud? And a lot of people get somebody just a forklift, just a dumb forklift of their VM straight up to the public cloud, and they come back saying, well, it was more expensive, so I went back to traditional infrastructure. But they're not taking advantage of the database as a service, and they're not taking advantage of traffic management and all these other things that they would see if they had the analytics and insight. So Microsoft Azure does a really good job. You'll actually find not many third parties tying into Azure as you do AWS. I think because they do a really good job of the insight, the analytics, the dashboard, all looks very pretty. Nice little graphs and analytics that's going on there, showing you the traffic and those sort of things. Amazon, I guess because they got in there so like they're really the pioneer of the whole public cloud, I see. And when you get in there that early, it's harder to change things later on. And it's also the reason why I like Amazon a lot is because it's very raw. So I'm free to do what I like, which is also why there's such a large third-party community out there. Building, monitoring, and analytics and graphs and things like that. You could probably, just billing alone, you could probably find about 50 companies that tie into Amazon just to give you billing analytics and predictions and alerting and things like that. So yeah, I do feel like Amazon has a really good shoe up there, that they've got the world on board there, all these developers developing that. Azure, if anybody is interested in finding an area that nobody's really, I think, tapped into very well, Azure, if you can find, there's a lot of things in Azure that, because Microsoft are doing such a good job with 80% of things with the analytics and monitoring, I think a lot of companies are scared off, but there's still this 20% there. I know a lot of enterprise agreement customers are having a hard time understanding what their billing is like there. And there's not much competition there. There's not many people out there doing it. So if anybody's thinking of, have a chat to me afterwards, because I'll give you a lot of ideas of if you want to tap into that sort of market. So that was, I'm not sure if I've gone overtime, undertime, or pretty good. That's all I had. If anybody has any questions now or afterwards, feel free to. Yep.
So Microsoft and Amazon are the big two.
Yeah.
Do you have any others you recommend for different reasons, like Rackspace or certain sectors of industry, or?
Yeah. So everybody has their place. I talk across a lot of different public clouds. Just Amazon and Azure are the big two that I deal with every day, obviously, because they're so big, most people are going with them. But SoftLayer, like I mentioned earlier, they've got locations within Canada, so they can actually certify that the data centers that you're using of theirs are not going to go into the US and are Canadian owned, which gets around the privacy and sovereignty issues for a lot of public Canadian workloads. So that's a good one I come up against all the time. VMware's vCloud Air, yet to really, excuse me, yet to look into it properly, but I believe that if they don't have it now, they're going to have very soon locations in Canada to look after vCloud Air. But even right now, you can find a data center that's using VMware and can tap into the backbone network of the vCloud Air throughout the States. So you could find a Canadian-owned company. So a lot of the time it's around sovereignty and Canadian location and latency that I recommend others. Rackspace, I've found in the last couple of years has fallen off my radar a little bit. And then I think it was end of last year, they announced their change of direction, which to me sounds like they've kind of thrown in the towel and said, look, we're a niche. We're more around the managed services. We're more around making sure you don't have to look after anything. So yeah, if you don't want to get technical at all, maybe that's the way to go. I have not looked into them since they made that announcement and what direction they're going with now. Google's another good one. I think they're making good